Okay, so welcome to our presentation about gritty meme culture in the 2020 election. I want to start by introducing myself, and then I'll let my fellow presenters introduce themselves as well. My name is Dr. Melissa Esmacher. I teach history at El Paso Community College's Northwest Campus. And in fact, all of the presenters tonight teach at El Paso Community College's Northwest Campus because we are one of the cooler campuses. Don't tell the other campuses we said that. Anyways, I've been a history professor at EPCC since 2014. My specialty is usually I look at things like pop culture, which is why I'm interested in memes, and race and violence. And I am going to ask the other presenters to talk about their hockey team affiliations. I will fully admit I am Switzerland when it comes to NHL affiliations. I'm not a huge hockey fan because I grew up in Houston. The sport is not native to me. I am neutral, but I am married to a Bruins fan. So commiserations or congratulations, however you root. So Josh, can I get you to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yes, I am Dr. Joshua Hevert. I am also a history professor, and like Dr. Esmacher said, at the Northwest campus. That Bruins fan that she is married to, me. I'm a big Bruins fan. Have been for a long time. Dr. Esmacher, when we were still in grad school, got to witness me go through the 2011 Stanley Cup victory and the 2013 loss to the Blackhawks, and now the loss most recently to the St. Louis Blues. She's a real trooper for having to put up with a Boston sports fan. In terms of history, which is, what I'm not here to necessarily talk to you about hockey, but always happy to talk hockey. I am not an American historian. I'm actually a European historian. I study the Middle Ages, and I'm particularly interested in religion, and institutional religion, yes, but popular religion also, which has a really interesting intersection with pop culture. And I think that there are insights from the medieval world that can help us understand memes to some extent, because as new as memes are to us, the idea of the meme, the way in which images have been used to convey meaning, I think is as old as humanity itself. So, and we'll also, I will be happy to talk about the intersection between politics and sports, because as much as sports fans want to pretend that sports and politics have nothing to do with each other, sports and politics have everything to do with each other. And we should take great interest in how those things intersect. So that should be a fun thing to talk about tonight.
All right, awesome. And lastly, but not leastly, Bob Nospish. Bob, can you introduce yourself?
Thank you, Melissa. Thank you, Dr. Esmacher. Thank you, Dr. Hevert, Josh. When I got this email from Melissa saying that she was going to put this presentation on, I started thinking, wait a minute, you're going to tie in a hockey mascot with the 2020 election and memes and what? And I was very surprised. But then I thought, if anybody can pull this off, it's going to be Dr. Esmacher and Dr. Hevert. Now, I, like Dr. Hevert, I'm also a hockey fan. My son got me into hockey. He's a Blackhawks fan. Sorry, Josh. But I am a fan of Pittsburgh Penguins. And I'm actually a fan of all things Pittsburgh. Here's my Pittsburgh Penguins coffee cup. I'm a fan of all things Pittsburgh, and that helped get me interested in this because Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, Gritty is the mascot of the Philadelphia Flyers. Those two cities don't like each other. And even though Pittsburgh and Boston fans usually don't like each other, we do unite against that common rival, Philadelphia. So it's all in fun here. And as far as my background goes, I'm the only one of us three who does not have a PhD. I tell my classes on the first day, I say, please don't call me doctor. I don't have a doctorate, and I don't perform brain surgery or deliver babies, so don't call me doctor. But I teach government, but yet if there's any discipline that is closely related to government, it's probably history. As a matter of fact, if you all can see behind me, you can see part of my bookshelves, and it's all rock and roll biographies and autobiographies. That's what I read. And you can't help reading about rock and roll biographies and autobiographies or other musical biographies without learning about history, without learning about culture, without learning about things like that. So it's all intertwined. I really like historians a lot because they do deep research. They dig and dig and dig, and I love to read anyway. And so that's my connection with Dr. Esmacher and Dr. Hevert. I teach government, as Dr. Esmacher was saying, at the Northwest campus. I've been there since 2013. Started as an adjunct. Started there after I retired from New Mexico State University after 26 years. And joining EPCC was one of the best decisions I've ever made. The people that I've been able to work with at the Northwest campus and at the other campuses and work with and know have just been fantastic. I can't think of anything that I don't like about anyone. There's no one there that I can say I honestly dislike. It's been a really, really great place to work, and I'm very, very fortunate. And thank you for the Go Aggies note. I just saw that. Thank you so much. But I just when Dr. Esmacher asked me about this, I started thinking, yeah, I will do my part to contribute, and I will do that, a little bit later on through the presentation. And I don't know what else to say about that. So, Melissa, I'm going to throw it back to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Bob. So now let's kind of kick off by starting a little bit, since we have 3 professors here, right? And we all have very different interests. Let's talk a little bit about how we normally cover elections in our classes, because in history and government, like Professor Nospish said, there's a lot of overlap of subject matter. So we generally do talk about elections in both of our fields. So Josh and Bob, do you guys want to elaborate a little bit on like how you normally talk about an election?
Well, contrary to maybe some popular belief, historians, well, most of us anyway, don't go over every single election. One of the things that historians are really good at, if they're doing their job, is picking out which things in this grand tale of humanity are the most significant or seem to be the most significant. Make an argument for why they're significant. So there are some elections that I cover that I argue are critically more important than others. So 1860 comes to mind. This guy from Illinois wore a hat. You may have heard of him. Abraham Lincoln. He's kind of important. Some of the other, like Thomas Jefferson's election comes to mind, especially now that it's been immortalized in song, thanks to Lin-Manuel Miranda, and certainly Obama's election, Trump's election, and the like. But I couldn't tell you all of the American presidents in order or out of order. Because there are some that are more significant than others. So, if you came for a stirring analysis about why Millard Fillmore's election matters, I don't have an answer for you.
Yeah, that's very true. Like, we as historians tend to, even though we're supposed to cover everything according to student learning outcomes, there are some people we emphasize more than others. I've actually challenged Dr. Hevert to maybe do a March Madness presidential bracket for this coming year, maybe. So that means we'll have to brush up on our historical presidential knowledge. Bob, how do you cover elections in your classes generally when you talk about them?
Well, I like that March Madness idea, Melissa. I think that's a really pretty good idea. In a way, I'm like Josh. It's not so much, one of the problems, and I come from a media background. I used to be a broadcast journalist, and The problem with the media covering elections is it becomes horse races. Who's in first, who's in second, who's in third? Who's in first, who's in second, who's in third? But what's important to us as consumers, as citizens, is what policies are they putting forth? Who's just a big windbag, bloating about what he's going to do if he gets elected, or cutting down his opponent? But what about the policies? What are you going to do about education policy? What are you going to do about healthcare policy? What about foreign policy? Which, by the way, of all the avenues in government, foreign policy, international relations is my favorite. That's my favorite part, because where we are in the world, we cannot be isolationist anymore, as we once tried about 100 so years ago. And we live in an interconnected society, interconnected world. And so getting back to the question, though, I want to teach my students why in 2016, for example, if Hillary Clinton got the popular vote, how did Donald Trump become president? Why did the Electoral College pick him? The same thing happened in 2000 with Al Gore and with George W. Bush. And there, Ralph Nader played a very major role as the Green Party candidate in that election as well. And this has happened 4 or 5 times in our history, where the person who got the popular vote did not get the Electoral College vote. And so one of the questions that a lot of students have, and it's a very valid question, is, well, why should I vote then? Why do we even count votes if my vote's not going to count, and if most people voted for this person but this person got into office by some other means? Well, first thing you have to do is, if you want to change that, is change the Constitution. It's written in the Constitution. The Electoral College is created, et cetera, and it's written out how that takes place, and why we have that. And then I go on to explain to the students why picking a president by popular vote is not a good idea. The Electoral College is not perfect, but it's better than picking by popular vote. And maybe a little bit later this evening, I'll have a chance to explain that. So to get back to I'm sorry, I've had coffee. I'm all amped up about this performance, especially drinking out of this Pittsburgh Penguins deluxe coffee cup model has fired me up even more. And so what I don't want, it's like the history professors here with us. I try to teach my students to look below the surface. The numbers don't matter. It doesn't matter who's got 47% and who's got 43%. They don't matter at all. But the whys and the hows, kind of like historians do. You know, why did so and so win? Why did Arizona this year, for example, flip? Why did Arizona go to a Democratic candidate instead of a Republican candidate? Things like this, and try to get students to think about things like this.
All right, awesome. So one of the things that, and thank you, Bob and Josh, one of the things that we kind of grapple with now is that one of the ways that we kind of have to talk about elections or social movements or other kinds of things more recently is to look at memes, because that has become an important kind of method of communication on the internet, especially during a time of global pandemic, right? Where we're probably communicating on the internet a little bit more than we ordinarily would because of social distancing. So as Dr. Hevert kind of hinted at, the kind of general idea of what a meme is pretty old, but the word meme is relatively new. I know our younger audience members will probably not think 1976 is all that new, but for us historians, that's relatively new. So the idea, like the word meme, Richard Dawkins introduced in 1976 to talk about an idea that spreads from person to person within a culture, on how ideas can kind of shift and change. But our modern understanding of meme as an image that's shared primarily through social media is slightly younger. Internet memes first kind of become a thing in the early 90s. So way back in the early days of the internet, but really memes become much more popular in usage after the introduction of YouTube as a platform, as the explosion of different social media platforms like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Why am I blanking? I was going to say Twitch, but not Twitch. I mean, TikTok. There we go. Snapchat, all that, all these different platforms, these different ways to easily spread information. Memes are interesting because they very much depend upon culture for meaning. So, Dr. Herbert, you mentioned that the idea of kind of sharing images with them having kind of attached meanings is pretty old. Do you want to give an example of that?
Yeah. So, we've all been to, well, maybe not all of us, but I would imagine that most of the 16 people on the call right now have been to a church. And I would be willing to bet, given where we are and the demographics of El Paso, that a lot of us have been to a Catholic church. And when you walk into a Catholic church, there are things that you are going to notice that are similar. You are going to see a crucifix. You are going to see, if it's a really well done sanctuary, you're probably going to see the Stations of the Cross. You're probably going to see a statue of Mary or the apostles. You're going to see artwork that seems familiar to you. And all of those religious images, especially in the Middle Ages, because the Middle Ages were so heavily religious, and Latin Christianity, or what we would call Catholic Christianity, infused the culture of Western Europe during that time. You could walk into any of those spaces and immediately know this is a space for X, Y, and Z, because the image that I'm looking at tells me exactly what I need to know. And especially at a time where not everybody could read Latin. Most people could not read Latin, which is the language of the church. The images do a lot more work in terms of cultural literacy than the words do. So, there's not an apples to apples or a one-to-one comparison between the meme that is currently on our screen and a crucifix, because one is invested with a whole lot more levels of meaning than another, but the same sort of vehicle for transmitting that information is within at least the same genus, if not the same species.
All right, thank you. And we're going to see this meme repeated later in the presentation, because that's the other thing that's cool about kind of internet memes is they constantly get remixed, because you could tell if you had somebody who didn't read English, for example, and could not read what these captions meant, you can kind of still get the overall like emotion and meaning out of the images. But then when you add captions that are legible, those are where you get a little bit more meaning. But definitely, as Dr. Hebert kind of mentioned, you have to have a culture attach a meaning to a symbol or an image. And this becomes very apparent how culture specific memes are when Gritty became a meme surrounding the 2020 election. People who were outside of the United States, and indeed many people who are outside of Philadelphia, did not know who or what Gritty is. One of my favorite examples is this tweet on the left-hand screen where someone who's Italian says, "Can anyone explain to this confused Italian living in the US what is up with Philadelphia and Gritty? Is he their demon?" Demon meaning kind of like a, see if I don't watch like his Dark Materials.
A familiar is what you're looking for.
Okay.
Yeah,
so
not like not an evil, malevolent spirit that haunts your dreams and does weird things to you in the night, but a kindred spirit, a representational spirit.
Yeah, thank you. And that's basically what this person is saying. I believe he's the manifestation of their city as a god, like Roma is for Rome. So basically that Gritty is kind of like this encapsulation of all things Philadelphia, right? Similarly, on the right, we have a very confused French reader of the newspaper Le Monde asking, "C'est quoi Gritty? What is Gritty?" right? And trying to kind of explain when Gritty became an election meme, like what exactly Gritty is, why is this funny, right? The humor doesn't automatically translate when you're talking about meme culture. You kind of have to explain. And I had that experience as well with one of my students, because I gave opportunity for my students to share memes with me. My students like, I don't get what Gritty is. Like, please explain to me. So let's talk a little bit about what Gritty is. All right. As familiar as Gritty is on the internet today, at least to sports fans, he's not that old of a mascot. Gritty was only introduced 2 years ago, in September of 2018, by the Philadelphia Flyers. As Professor Nospish said, that's their mascot. And the Flyers specifically wanted to create a mascot that had the sort of same kind of weird off-kilter image as the Philly Fanatic for the Phillies baseball team. And so they recruited a concept artist named Brian Allen, and then the sort of main portrayer of the Fanatic, David Raymond, to design what became Gritty. And what's interesting is what you see on the screen, what Gritty looks like, was pretty much what Gritty, like from day one, first concept drawing. That was Gritty. So he was not really all that changed. When Gritty was introduced, initially people were like, what is this thing? He was called like an eldritch horror, like a deranged Muppet. And when people started criticizing the Flyers for this very weird orange mascot, that's when people in Philadelphia came to really kind of embrace him. In fact, only a couple weeks after he was introduced, the city council passed a resolution formally welcoming Gritty as the city's mascot. And I think part of the resolution really kind of explains the appeal of Gritty. One of the councilwomen, Helen Jim, said, "These are extraordinarily challenging times in our country. I think people need to come together through loving something, an entity," referring to Gritty, "that is unafraid to be itself. We're the original city of rebels and revolutionaries. I think that this initially ghastly, appalling creature strolled in at a time when we least expected it, but probably most needed it." So Gritty was initially kind of met with reservations, but then very quickly kind of embraced by Philadelphia. As a lot of people, when I was looking at research, said, they're like, well, as soon as, like this one guy said, I was a lifelong Flyers fan. And when they introduced Gritty, I was like, what the crap is this? What is this thing? But then I saw people starting to criticize Gritty on social media, and I said, shut up, I would die for Gritty. So he said it's a very Philadelphia thing to do, to kind of embrace that which other people mock about Philly. So what's interesting is that Gritty being in memes is not something that's new to the 2020 election. Actually, really early on, Gritty becomes very popular in memes. In fact, only about less than a month after he was introduced in October 2018, Gritty is actually, his image is used in protest signs and posters by left-wing activists protesting President Trump's visit to Philadelphia. And so very quickly, Gritty is kind of embraced by the left in a way that in 2016, the alt-right embraced the cartoon image of Pepe the Frog. So Gritty kind of becomes this symbol of the left. And this actually sparks a little bit of a debate. Can the left claim Gritty, who's a hockey mascot? And in fact, this sparked an angry Wall Street Journal op-ed by Jillian K. Melchior, who said, "Gritty belongs to Philadelphia, not to far-left activists. Still in an era when everything from Nike and NFL to your local restaurant is a political battlefield. This development is as predictable as it is sad. Not only can't we have nice things, we can't even have silly, creepy things." So let's kind of explain the groups that embrace Gritty. So there are a couple of sort of different political terms floating around to describe folks that are on the left in American politics. So I want to call in our resident government expert, Professor Nosbish, to kind of sort out for us. Like, for example, when we say the term Antifa, which is shorthand for anti-fascism, like, what does that mean?
That's wow. That's tough to describe, Melissa. I mean, people hear that word and it's one of those trigger words for some people, where they think, okay, you have the far right, almost goes so far right to go to fascism or Nazism, that Antifa is the same but only on the far left. So yeah, way over to the as far left as you can go. And what happens is when you have that polarization, when people hear Antifa and when they believe that, and if someone says, yeah, I'm a member of Antifa, and if people think, well, they're far left, what that means is, or what that implies is, I will not be able to communicate with this person because this person won't listen to a word I say. And this is one of the problems with government. In fact, I live in New Mexico. We had a senator, Jeff Bingaman, who served for a long time, and he still could have served several more years. But one reason why he decided not to run for re-election some years ago is he said, I'm tired of the partisan politics. At the time Bingaman was a senator, we had a Republican senator as well, Pete Domenici. And even though ideologically Domenici and Bingaman disagreed with each other on many things, they also worked together. They would co-sponsor bills to bring money to Sandia National Labs, or to White Sands Missile Range, or to Holloman Air Force Base, or to Kirtland or Cannon Air Force Base. And so they would sponsor these bipartisan bills, where the sides worked with each other across the aisle. Now we've gotten away from that. And some people blame Antifa for that. Some people blame the far right movement, Proud Boys, things like that for that. Some people blame the president for stirring the pot when it comes to things like this as well. Some people blame, and you get my drift. What's happening is there's a lot of finger pointing going on, but what most Americans want to know is, well, what are you going to do to fix it? We don't want to know who's responsible for what, or who did what to whom 5 years ago or last congressional session. We want to know, we elected you people. How are you going to fix this? So I know that's kind of like a long, roundabout way of answering your question, Melissa. And if you want me to segue into socialism and communism,
because it sounds like Antifa is a label.
Can we pause on Antifa for just a second?
Sure.
Because I think it's important to reiterate that Antifa is not an organization. Like, it is not.
It's a label.
Yeah, it's a label. So it's not like you can go to, I don't know, Philadelphia and go to Antifa headquarters and Gritty will meet you in the lobby. Like, that would be amazing, and I would go if there wasn't a pandemic because I want to meet Gritty. But this is a loose collection of different groups, and some of them are more aligned than others. There are some who claim to be Antifa but don't, dress in the black bloc and go and bust heads as a kind of counter to the Nazis that showed up in Charlottesville, or the Proud Boys in the Pacific Northwest and almost everywhere at this point. There are some who are just, people who are taking anti-racist action, and because they are protesting racism, like, on the University of North Carolina Chapel Hill campus, where you have people who are protesting neo-Confederates, and because they're protesting neo-Confederates, the neo-Confederates label themselves as Antifa, or label the college students as Antifa, even though those college students don't claim that label necessarily for themselves. So it's this weird kind of mismatch of stuff. And I think Bob's hesitation to kind of really rigidly define it is a good hesitation, because it's so loosely connected, and it's a way, it's almost a shorthand for talking about leftist politics and leftist action, than it is a real sticky label.
Yes, correct. So when we're talking about the kind of more formal methods of organization or formal political belief system, that was where socialism would be a much more accurate conversation to have. So Bob, do you want to kind of define a little bit for us what socialism is?
Sure, sure. Socialism is, I think Josh said we had something like 16 people on this call this evening. Let's say that I go out and buy a pizza, and we all get 16 equal slices. That's socialism. Nobody gets anything more than anybody else. You find this like in the kibbutzes in Israel where people work together. You all pull your weight together, and you all do. Chores are shared similarly, etc. And there's none of this. Well, that person's slice of pizza is bigger than mine, or that person has a bigger slice of pizza, or I work harder than this person, so therefore I should get two slices of pizza, and this person should get half of a slice because he or she didn't do as much work. It's everything is split even, or equal, and Bernie Sanders, of course, was known as a socialist candidate for president, and whether you agree with the Sanders and his philosophy, his ideologies, or not, is that of course is up to you. But it's one of these it's one of these political ideologies where people say, because we don't have socialism, that's where problems begin. That's where we have the haves and the have-nots. That's where we have like the 1% of the richest people in this country who can take advantage of tax loopholes and stay rich, whereas poor people in areas where they might be paying something like a sales tax, which was a regressive tax, everybody pays the same amount. How do we even have equality when we have these haves and have-nots? You look at it today, even online education, when you think of college students, think of K through 12 students, not everybody has the same technology. Not everybody has fast internet speed, et cetera, et cetera. So socialism, for what it's worth, I remember when I was in Europe some years ago, I went back to Finland for the second time, and I took a train from Helsinki to this place called Joensuu, about 100 kilometers from the Russian border. And this is back when the U.S. and Soviet Union were enemies. Soviet Union did exist, so obviously this was before December 26, 1991. And I remember I stayed at a youth hostel there in Joensuu, Finland. And there were people there from Australia, from Holland, from Norway. There was a guy from Norway, people from all over, and I was the only American. And and as an American, I did not want to discuss politics because a lot of the rest of the world looks at America differently than we look at ourselves. But I remember the youth hostel director would always ask me questions about the United States and why does the United States spend so much money on the military and on bombs and on this, that, and the other. And I was in the military at the time, so that was a real hard question for me to answer diplomatically. But he tried explaining Finland and the way they look at things, the way their government looks at things. One thing, teachers get paid very well there compared to a lot of the rest of the population, working population. But it's we in our country, if we want to become multimillionaires, we can. That's what's ingrained upon us, and so socialism would, if everybody had an equal part of everything, some people might say, well, what's the incentive to be the best you can be if it's going to be shared with everybody else? So again, Melissa, a long-winded answer.
All right. So when Gritty's used, thank you, Bob. So when Gritty's used in memes to kind of support socialism or anti-fascism, right, left-wing activism, a lot of times it is a critique of capitalism, right? Like you see in this Gritty meme here, we should just eat the rich, right? Or it's a critique of fascism, or as Bob mentioned, kind of the extreme right. So there are a lot of Gritty memes about Gritty is kind of this sort of leftist, sort of almost anarchist figure. How many men have I killed? Not men. I kill fascists. I came to smash fascists and awaken chaos gods. I'm all out of chaos gods. Remember, kids, go vote. Violently overthrow the elites. Then these two are the one, again, kind of referencing a little bit more communism, where there's this idea that in order to achieve that kind of perfect balance and equality, we have to overthrow the capitalist system, right? And when we say proletarians in this meme on the right, we're referring to the working classes, right? To the people who do not have power and wealth. So Gritty is kind of oftentimes sort of seen as this almost chaotic figure who's advocating for class equality in this category of Gritty memes. So yeah, same kind of thing here. What I like is the use of other orangish Muppets on this meme on the left. So yeah, so Gritty's has this long history of being kind of adopted and incorporated by activists on the left, both in Philadelphia and elsewhere. And for them, the kind of his face is sort of chaotic. He doesn't seem to have very much of a sort of structure to his life or his belief system. And you can kind of see this, like the Philadelphia Flyers management doesn't really encourage this type of Gritty meme. But definitely, if you look at the official Twitter account, Gritty is definitely seen as a bit of a chaotic figure. Like there's a kind of room where you can just go and smash things with a hockey stick at the Flyers Stadium. There's a arena, excuse me. There's like Gritty was accused of punching a child earlier this year, and everybody in Philadelphia sided with Gritty rather than the child. He shot people with t-shirt cannons before. So in other words, this kind of anarchist streak in how Gritty behaves as official mascot plays well into these memes.
Well, and we should also talk a little bit about why this works in Philadelphia and kind of the context of Philadelphia sports. I mean, Philadelphia is known in the sporting world for being an unruly place. These people in Philadelphia, Eagles fans, booed Santa Claus famously. They have thrown batteries at people. There was a jail built into the old Veterans Stadium to handle the rowdiness of Philadelphians. Even the Flyers themselves, they used to be known as the Broad Street Bullies back in the 70s and 80s when hockey was about physicality more than about speed and skill. And you know that plays into his name too. If you spend any time in a hockey forum, you will come to find these like old-timey hockey bros that just want to talk about how good a player is because he's got grit. He's a tough guy. And you know, there's a lot of really interesting things that we could talk about working class hockey fans and the worship of the fourth line, kind of the last skaters that are they're not top billing. They're not necessarily the most skilled players on the ice. They have one job, and it's to smash. Especially back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, like you had guys on the team, they just existed for fighting. They couldn't score goals, or if they did, it was like a worldwide top 10 ESPN event if they scored a goal. I mean, they just, you put that guy out on the ice and he beats the crap out of somebody, and then he goes and he serves his 10 to 15 minutes in the box, or he goes to the locker room and changes back into his street clothes, and congratulations, you got somebody from the other team in the box at the same time. The fans have a good time, beer gets thrown, everybody's happy. So, I mean, there's this kind of fighting mentality built into Gritty Number one. Number two, you've got this other layer of raucousness in Philadelphia. And then we could go even further back. We could talk about the American Revolution and how violent the Sons of Liberty were, especially in places like Philadelphia. And there's this kind of like real like street mob violence kind of baked into the DNA of the city. So like of course Gritty plays well there.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about it, when we talk about kind of toughness and violence, I mean, people like to talk about that with football, but hockey is, I think, still the only sport in which fighting is legal.
Legal? No. I
What
mean,
other
there's a
sport?
penalty.
Well,
You get 5 minutes in the box, and if you fight too much, you get sent off with a game
but
misconduct.
still, it's not an automatic ejection like in basketball.
No, and usually it's the way that a hockey player, a hockey fan will explain it to you, as a hockey fan is about to. It's about the players policing themselves.
Mm.
It's controlled violence, accepted violence to keep other violence from getting out of hand. And you know, there's part of me that's like, that is such a BS argument. Like, stop this nonsense. Like, are you kidding me? Violence protects you from more violence. Like, come on, holy mother of tautology. Ridiculous. But you know, there's something to be said. And hockey's not the only sport that has this kind of unwritten rule. Baseball's full of it too. You know, if you spend too long looking at a pitcher after you hit a home run, or you run too slowly around the bases during the home run, a pitcher is going to hurl a 95-mile-an-hour ball of hard leather at your head because he felt disrespected. So hockey's not the
But here's the thing, Josh, about hockey, and what you're saying is true when you consider all the fighting, et cetera, et cetera. But at the end of a hockey game, what do? They line up and they shake hands. So
Yes.
They just spent the last hour, beating the snot out of each other, and yet they still line up and shake hands. And then, by the way, going back to Philadelphia and the Philadelphia fans, 2 points here. Number one, we're talking about the city of brotherly love, which I find kind of, I just call Philadelphia Oakland East, because if you ever watched Raiders fans, well, there you have it. But the other thing is going back to the booing the Santa Claus and the batteries and the snowballs. Back then, Philadelphia and Dallas were in the same division, and they did not like each other. You could say they hated each other. The Dallas coach was Jimmy Johnson. The Philadelphia coach was a guy named Buddy Ryan. And I don't know if this is true or not, but Buddy Ryan had been accused of putting bounties on Dallas players. So in other words, Josh, let's say you were a player for the Philadelphia Eagles, and I was Coach Ryan. I'd say, Josh, you knock that quarterback out, and you're going to get an extra $5,000 in your next check. Putting bounties or wide receivers or running backs, the so-called skilled positions. You knock them out. Guess what? You just earn yourself some more money. Now, whether this is true or not, I won't go into that. But again, the irony is, Philadelphia being the city of brotherly love, we think, like you were saying, Josh, about the fans of Philadelphia, the reputation that the fans have, it just doesn't mix with the title city of brotherly love.
No, they're absolutely crazy in ways that fans are not crazy in some other. I mean, this is coming from a Boston fan, so take it with a giant grain of salt, because we're crazy too. And I grew up in Denver, and Broncos fans are crazy. Like, everybody gets so upset about riots these days, but when a sports team in Denver wins a championship, they set the whole city on fire, for reasons I can't understand. When the Eagles won the Super Bowl a couple years ago against my New England Patriots, which I realized the whole world celebrated because everybody hates the Patriots. But the lasting image I have of a Philadelphia fan post Super Bowl victory was a Eagles fan literally putting his face in a pile of horse poop from the police horses and like just digging in because Philadelphia. And that's the kind of, I don't know, that's the kind of chaos that Gritty embodies, I suppose.
Yeah, this is what happens when you have a colony founded by pacifist Quakers, and then you invite a bunch of Scotch-Irish folks to come and settle it. And yeah, Pennsylvania has always been this really weird, interesting intersection of different cultures back to colonial era, which is why you have the Sons of Liberty, who we associate with things like dumping tea in the harbor, actually, you know, beating people up and being a lot more violent than we remember. So I do want to make sure we get to the Gritty election memes because they're good. So 2020 election, the reason that Gritty becomes a meme again is because the vote is close, right? We're waiting to see how the Electoral College is going to be called. And Bob, why is it that we don't directly elect presidents? How does the Electoral College, in a very brief nutshell, work?
Well, the Electoral College, there are 538 members of the Electoral College, and they can't be holding political office at the time. And it's based on state population. So, for example, California, the most populous state, there are 2 Electoral College members because California and every state has 2 senators. And there are 50-some Electoral College members for California because they have that many people in the House of Representatives. Texas is 38 Electoral College people, I believe, for 36 members in the House of Representatives and 2 senators. Here in New Mexico, we have 5. And to get to your question, Melissa, about the whole why do we not go by the popular vote? Number one, if we're going to do that, we'd have to change the Constitution. Okay, that's you have to amend the Constitution. But beyond that, even states like Montana, which have 3 Electoral College members because they only have 1 person in the House of Representatives. I think there are 7 states that only have 3 people in Congress, 2 senators and 1 representative, Montana being one of them. Montana still has a voice, though. North Dakota still has a voice. Other states still have a voice. New Mexico still has a voice. And if we were to just go by the popular vote, then your areas of the country that have the highest population regionally would be the ones who would be selecting our president. So let's take the Northeast, for example. You throw in Boston, Washington, New York, Philadelphia, Baltimore, throw in maybe Providence, Rhode Island. That would be like one area of the country, right? You could have the Deep South, and you could include Atlanta, Charlotte, North Carolina, New Orleans, and then the big cities in Florida. And that'd be another area. East Texas, you'd have Dallas, Fort Worth, San Antonio, Austin. That'd be a Houston as well. That'd be a third area. You have Southern California. You have the upper Midwest. If you were to collect and combine Chicago, Detroit, Milwaukee, Minneapolis, Indianapolis. So there you have like a 5th region up there. And what happens is when you look at these population regions, there are big open spaces of the country that are not accounted for. El Paso and southern New Mexico. So who would be our voice? Who would be the voice for us? Who would be the voice for the farmers throughout the country, you know, through the Midwest as well? People who live in rural areas. We would not have a voice if if we went by popular vote, because proportionately, the places with the larger populations would have more voters. And so that's one of the major reasons why, even though the Electoral College is not perfect, that's why going strictly by popular vote would not work. And one other thing I want to say about this, Melissa, is so some of my students will say, well, then why vote? Why should I vote? And one of the first things I tell them is, you got to remember, yes, it is a presidential election, but there are other races on the ballot. You're not just voting for the president and vice president of the United States. And so then when we stress the importance of your local candidates and your statewide candidates, it hopefully wakes some of them up to go vote and say, yeah, my vote might make a difference in some of these other races.
Awesome. Thank you, Bob.
You're welcome.
So from your explanation, right, each state has a set number of electoral college votes. And the way that most states do it is whoever wins the popular vote in that state gets those electoral college votes, right? And so basically what it came down to is a number of states, because of increased mail-in voting, right, we didn't have the answers right away. So Pennsylvania was one of those states, right, where we were waiting. They had increased the mail-in voting because of the pandemic to allow for social distancing. And as we waited it for votes to trickle in, right, that's when Philadelphia and their votes were tallied some of the last in Pennsylvania's vote. And Philadelphia the area tends to vote blue. So that's when the gritty memes really started, right? While we were waiting, like, no, we didn't have enough electoral college votes, right, to definitively decide the race. So that's when the gritty memes start rolling in. Dr. Hebert, you petitioned for this one to come in. You want to kind of debrief it?
I just love the action, the motion in this meme. And it tells us a lot about it. I mean, one of the things that to really understand this meme, and I know I'm going to kill the joke because I'm over explaining it. I'm going to academic this to death. So I'm sorry if I ruin this meme for you. But if we look at the upper Midwest states here, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan, those were states that were considered to be, in the 2016 election, Hillary Clinton's blue wall. These were states that Hillary Clinton was not going to lose. In fact, one of the criticisms of Hillary Clinton's campaign was that she did not really campaign in these states. And they ended up going, I don't think Minnesota did. Did Minnesota go for Trump in 16?
No, Josh. Of the 8 states that border the Great Lakes, Minnesota, Illinois, and New York all went to Clinton, but the other 5 states went to
but Wisconsin, Michigan, they did go to Trump, and that was a big part of his win. And so we have the kind of blue wall states kicking out the GOP, and the GOP is running to Georgia, which has been red or Republican for. When was the last time that they voted for a non-conservative candidate? Clinton? Okay, but...
And before that, Jimmy Carter.
Okay, but number one, Jimmy Carter was from Georgia. And he was running against Gerald Ford. So, come on. I could have beaten Gerald Ford, and I wasn't even conceived yet. And number 2, Bill Clinton. Sorry, more conservative folks, he's a pretty conservative guy in terms of left politics. So it's kind of no surprise that a Southern politician from Arkansas would win Georgia. But anyway, Georgia has gone Republican, is seen as kind of a more conservative place. So here comes the GOP running to Georgia, but no, boom, comes in with duplex and just smashes that elephant down. And then, they're already down, and here comes Gritty from the top rope with the people's elbow straight out of Philadelphia to finish it off. And I don't know, the dead look of Gritty's face in his eyes and that open mouth with that elbow of justice flying down. There's so much I love about it.
Yeah, unfortunately, because we're videotaping this and copyright, I couldn't include any of the awesome video memes about Gritty, but there was another wrestling one that I found on Twitter that was kind of similar, that just had Gritty kind of representing I'm blanking on the name of the wrestler. I apologize to my friends who are wrestling fans. Stone Cold, there we go. Gritty was kind of photoshopped over Stone Cold's face to come in and finish off the GOP.
Wrestling memes are their own whole genre that could take hours and years to unpack.
So I told you we'd see the cat meme again, and here it is, right? Bad things happen in Philadelphia, right? Kind of the unofficial sort of motto of Philadelphia, at least as I understand it, Philadelphian, just purely looking at Twitter, seems to be F around and find out, right? That you don't want to mess with Philly. I also really enjoy this meme of Gritty kind of being photoshopped over Jason Momoa. The other thing too was when it became clear, right, that the election was going to be going to go towards Biden in Pennsylvania, there was an attempt to stop counting the votes, and so I particularly enjoyed this meme of Gritty representing Philadelphia, just wreaking havoc.
Well, I also want to draw your attention to the fact that Gritty is naked.
Yes.
And there was a very special moment on the Flyers ice where Gritty came running out of nowhere naked like he was streaking, which is where this moment is captured from. Again, just, wreaking havoc, doing like chaotic things for chaotic things' sake. And it's like, you can't, like, the Trump administration and these attempts to stop the count, like, you can't stop Philadelphia's energy.
So then we have, right, the meme that's responding to conservative pundits being like, well, if Philadelphia won't stop counting these votes, right, then we'll go down them themselves with the team. And I love this tie-in to the Avengers, right? We have a Gritty. We see your army and we raise you a Gritty.
Yes. Well, also Harlan Hill is going to bring, I don't know, the denizens of Munchkin Land with him. Straight out of the Wizard of Oz. I also will note that Mr. Hill was fired from Fox News after saying incredibly inflammatory, sexist, and racist things. So Gritty can get him.
Yep. I also really kind of enjoyed these sorts of things, like, right, alluding to the fact that Donald Trump's spray tan is very orange, right, and Gritty is orange. It took Gritty to take out Donald Trump. This is my favorite meme of all of the Gritty election memes. This one was actually created by a woman on Facebook named Courtney Griffiths. This one references the Game of Thrones, right? Iconic scene. Tell Donald I want him to know it was me, right? That Gritty in Philadelphia kind of sealed the Electoral College win for Biden and was what finally tipped it over the edge. So to kind of sort of wrap up the Gritty election memes, like Philadelphia sort of gleefully, right, took credit for carrying the election for Biden. So Gritty got photoshopped into a lot of sort of iconic revolutionary artwork, like we see here on the left from the French Revolution, right on the right from the American Revolution. There's lots of photoshopping suggesting that because of Philadelphia's crucial role in cementing the initial electoral college victory for Joe Biden, that Gritty should be invited to participate in Washington politics in various capacities. For example, Secretary of Defense with his T-shirt gun, or as a new cabinet member. Other folks on Twitter have suggested that Gritty should hold the inauguration Bible. I will note, too, that Dr. Joe Biden is from Philadelphia. So to kind of wrap up this discussion of Gritty and the 2020 election and memes, do you guys feel like we're going to remember the 2020 election for memes or for the unprecedented refusal to concede? Or how do you feel like we're going to remember this?
So, as a historian, and Dr. Esmacher, I think you could probably agree with this, or want to say something similar. Historians are always going to look for primary sources. So, one of the things I asked my students in the last week of their class with me in History 1302 this semester was, imagine you're doing a history 30 years from now, and you're trying to figure out, what was the 2020 election all about? And, you can go to the official reports. You can go to, what the campaigns put out, look at the video events or whatever, but you're not really going to necessarily get the pulse of what a certain segment of the population, like in this case, the internet, if you could consider that a segment of the population, you're not going to get a real feel for what that election was about by going to those like official sources. So looking at these memes, I would want to look at them as a way of trying to understanding popular culture wrestling with the anxieties of the election, because I'm sure all of us can resonate with the feeling, going into the election, depending on who you voted for, I don't think it actually matters who you voted for. Just this feeling of anxiety, this, kind of dare to hope, but expect the worst of things to happen. Just kind of the pessimism of 2020. And you could use these memes to really kind of get a sense of that release in some sense, or just trying to make some sense out of what just seems completely uncontrollable and difficult.
Yeah, because that's one thing that we normally don't see a lot of when we look at like history textbooks, or from my memory of taking government as a student, government textbooks, we really talk more about like this was the result and this was their platform, but we really don't talk about kind of popular perceptions of elections or responses to elections. And I think given that this was a pandemic year, right, and a lot of anxiety over how the pandemic was handled and how the last 4 years went, and would we have 4 more years of this, or would we see a little bit more stability? I think that definitely played, like you said, into the anxiety. And looking at fun memes is a great way to address your anxiety. How will we remember the election?
Well, I think Dr. Hebert hit the nail on the head with the word anxiety. This has been a year unlike any other year, and I've been around for a while on this planet, and this has been a year unlike any other year that most of us have ever seen. Um, two different types of government. There's the American government, which is 2305. Then there's Texas government, which is 2306. And Texas has had 7 constitutions. One of the constitutions they had was because they had a Republican governor named E.J. Davis, who lost an election, and he refused to leave. He refused to leave. He refused to leave Austin. He actually contacted President Grant for federal assistance, federal troops to help him stay in power. And Grant said, "No, that's your state. You figure it out." And then he eventually left Austin, and so there's some parallels between what happened then in 60, 70, whatever year it was, and what's happening now. 50 days from today, President-elect Joe Biden will be the resident of the White House, and to answer this question that you have, Melissa, if I was to ask my students, this election will be remembered in just like a couple of words, I'm sure some would say sore loser. And even within the Trump family, Ivanka and Jared Kushner had said he should concede. Eric Trump and Donald Trump Jr. said, no, you should keep fighting this thing. And so this is like that song that we all know. This is a song that never ends. That runs through my head when I think of this election. This is like the election that never ends. Even just recently, a couple of states certified their election results. President Trump is he's going to go down with the ship. He's going to still stand. He might be the last man standing in his own defense that this was a fraudulent election or whatever, despite what others, including Republicans, who have kind of pulled away from him, have been saying. And I know that Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner say, look, you want to be remembered graciously and for the good things you've done, and not be remembered as a sore loser. But this was a different type of president. This was a different type of election. This is one where I think people look at this election and they say, you know, look at all this fighting, this back and forth between Republicans and Democrats. What are we doing about the pandemic? What are we going to do about putting kids back in school? What are we going to do about putting people back to work again, opening up restaurants, opening up businesses so people can work, et cetera, instead of just the big box corporations being able to stay alive. And I know that I'm in a kind of unique position from all of you, because I would guess that most of you on this call live in El Paso or live in Texas. I live in New Mexico. Our governor approaches the pandemic very, very differently than your governor did. We had everything shut down for 2 weeks. Now, what happens here is you have some New Mexicans that would go down to El Paso because, you know, more stores would be open, restaurants would be open, et cetera. And then they come back to New Mexico. You also have Texans who come out to New Mexico because they like the mountains of Cloudcroft and Ruidoso. So, you know, we're not going to put up a wall and keep Texans out. But how do we handle this? And I think these are the things people are looking at answers for. I mean, yeah, certainly it was an important election, a very important election. But I think people will look at this election and tie it into, well, did either the candidates do anything for me or to give me hope, to give my family hope, so we can move forward? Now, I'm an optimist. I was hit by some bad news this year, but you know, you just keep plugging on, because without hope you have nothing, really. And so I think this election, Dr. Esmacher, I think it'll be remembered as being very chaotic, being very, Dr. Hebert used the great word anxiety. It was very anxiety inducing. You know, the students that we have are going through enough as it is, without watching these, and then have to be reminded of what these political candidates are doing and saying, and who's disliking whom, and this, that, and the other, and you know, hopefully it won't be enough to discourage them from taking in, you know, being involved in politics or government. And maybe some of them will one day decide to run for office, and maybe start out small, like a school board or a city council, and then maybe work their ways up through the rank. Yeah, this was a very, because I teach this stuff, I thought it was a very interesting election. Also coming from a journalism background, watching the way the media covered or didn't cover certain things, it was fascinating. Not everyone would agree with me on that, but that's okay. That's okay. So I'll also remember it as the election that we have this, in which we have this post-election discussion like the one we're having tonight, and in which I've had way too much coffee.
So if our election is to be remembered as chaotic and anxiety-inducing, Gritty seems like a good mascot for that.
Absolutely.
Definitely, without a doubt.
We ran over time. We want to really thank our interpreters, especially for having to translate words like tautology. Dr. Hebert.
Sorry.
So, thank you.
Bad. I saw Crisol was on the call, and I just wanted to impress her with a philosophy word.
So we'll take time to, if you guys have any questions that you want to ask, you can either use your hand to raise or type in the chat. And we are collecting Gritty memes, by the way. Like Dr. Hebert was not kidding. Like, we consider these good primary sources to use in future classes. So if you have any Gritty memes that weren't on here that you think are really cool and worthy of saving, send them to us.
Me 30 years from now thanks you in advance.
Well, Dr. Esmacher, while we're waiting for people to post questions, let me ask you this. what is the origin of the word meme? Do you know?
Yeah, so Richard Dawkins was the one who introduced the word meme.
Are we talking Richard Dawkins, the evolutionary biologist?
Yes.
He's a jerk, but that's another point.
Yeah. No, for him, it was the idea of that ideas and things evolve as people interact with them and share them. But Dr. Havert can tell you, like, meme as a Latin is Latin, right? Not Greek.
Yes? Question mark.
You're the one
I'm
who
gonna
speaks
Google
ancient
it.
language, not me.
That's good, Dr. Hayward. I'll be able to Google it myself. I just I remember the first time I heard the word, and I said, "Oh, what?"
Yeah, it's been around for a while, but it's not really exploded into popular usage until when all the stuff I was looking at, all the sources I was looking at, for meme really kind of pinpoints our modern usage of the word meme to mean something we share on social media really after the introduction of YouTube.
Okay.
Yeah, in pop culture now, I always liken it to the word mimesis, which is, again, here comes the philosophy word. It's a very
interns.
Aristotelian concept that means of the philosopher Aristotle. Okay, so in Aristotle's Poetics, he talks a little bit about mimesis as kind of this mirror image of reality, etc. We should really get philosophy involved with, by the way, because philosophy has a lot to say about these sorts of things, and kind of reproducing reality, and as a way of commentary too. So Greek is the origin. It doesn't mean that the Romans didn't steal it, because the Romans stole everything from Greece. But, well, not everything, but a lot of things.
John, did you have a question? I see your mic is unmuted.
No, I'm just listening in.
Okay. Other questions, comments? Thank you, by the way, to my friends attending from out of town. And I know we have a rep for Philly sports here, Lisa. Thank you so much for tuning in.
One of the things that I wanted to jump off of, something that Bob said, and kind of relates back to our conversation about how will this election be remembered. I think it highlights a ongoing trend in American politics, and that is a range of feeling among the American public between ambivalence and deep suspicion about the government. And that doesn't, equate left or right or center, but especially since the Vietnam era, there has been a large distrust of the government, and what we see here with the kind of undermining of norms, with the refusal to concede and accept results, etc., kind of plays into that sneaking suspicion among Americans that the government does not work for them, and that there needs to be wholesale change and reform. And some people saw Donald Trump as the avatar of that change and reform, and other people kind of look at that as what are you even thinking? How could that person be the vanguard of change and reform? But I see Donald Trump, his election and election loss as being more towards the kind of ambivalent side of government. Like, Joe Biden's not a change candidate. He's not a radical, despite his opponent's attempts to paint him as such. He's adopted some things that 1994 Joe Biden probably would have shook his head at, but You know, it's kind of to me, Biden is a deeply ambivalent choice, just to kind of get back to some hope of normalness and not a real push forward, one way or the other. So we have to look at that and look at this election in that lens, I think.
All right, John, you had your hand up.
Yeah, let's see. Am I mute? Yeah, I've got my mute off. Okay. Being a little bit older than I think most of the crowd here, I can remember the Nixon era, and all of the ambivalence or distrust was focused on the White House, or at least the executive branch. But I see this 2020 being far more diffused across cities and states. And of course, some of these observations are anecdotal, but I have a colleague from Michigan who ran on the Democratic ticket for county commissioner and was also involved with the teachers union. And in his 200 listserv people on his list, 180 said they were voting for Trump. And so across the board there's still a feeling amongst people who were traditionally blue state, traditionally registered Democrats. They're saying, you know, this, well, I guess the tattoo that's being pointed out, maybe that'll be the new meme, is the tattoo that says "Stop the Steal." So, as an anecdote from Michigan, that's what I'm seeing and hearing from back east. Because from the Buckeye State, the first thing I see, how are we going to remember the 2020 election? We got to wait and see what happens in 2024. Because as from the state of presidents and the Ohio State Buckeyes, we can't forget Grover Cleveland. And I'm finding that, in the words of Santayana, the Spanish historian, says, history, if we don't remember it, we're condemned to repeat it. So I'm kind of sitting back here. I'm looking for the rematch, to go back to your history, or not, rather your professional wrestling reference.
Yeah.
I'm looking for the best of three on this one.
God,
Just an observation.
God help us if it's a pay-per-view event.
Oh, well, you never have to pay for that. You just wait a week or two and then you can see it live.
Yeah, or steal the cable.
No. I'm not a Bernie Sanders affiliate who brags about stealing cable.
Man,
I'll leave you with this final anecdote. My father was a dairy farmer, and his big joke was, I wear a big heavy leather belt for 3 reasons: to keep my pants up, and I have 2 sons.
There you go. There's a question
kind
in
of
the
kept
chat.
us out of D block and max security, I suppose.
Of course. There's a really good question in the chat, Dr. Esmacher.
I can't see it. The last question I see is, or the last post I see is from Jennifer. So if you want to go ahead and read it.
The question is from Olivia Esmacher, some relation. And the question is, do you think that this could have happened with any other city mascot, entity, meme, or is it uniquely suited to Gritty and Philadelphia?
Oh, that's a good question, future Dr. Esmacher. We're going to call you Dr. Esmacher the second. Olivia's working on her PhD in engineering. I can't think of any other sports mascot that elicits quite the same level of response as Gritty. I can't think of any other sports mascot I've seen already kind of have a track record and history of being involved in political memes like Gritty is. I think that this was kind of a perfect storm of a figure who was already kind of involved in political memes in a city, right, that had a reputation, as we've discussed, for kind of raucous hooliganism when it comes to sports and activist culture. So I can't really think of any other city or mascot equivalent that this could have turned out that way. What do you
No,
guys think, Josh and Bob? Can you think of any other analogs?
no. I mean, in terms of wild sports cities, and Bob, maybe you can back me up on this. Philly, I think, reigns supreme. Boston, New York, depending on where you go. Like you're not gonna find a whole bunch of raucous fans at Yankee Stadium at their $1 million martini bar. Maybe in the stands and maybe outside the stadium. Maybe you'll find some raucousness, but you don't see that kind of chaos from New York teams. Generally speaking, maybe the Islanders, maybe. Oakland and the Raiders certainly ring out. But everyone else, man, like it's pretty straight laced, at least at the professional level. College sports is a different beast entirely.
Yeah, I can see college sports kind of having a little bit more potential contenders for this kind of, but even then, I can't really mascot as a reputation for anarchy, kind of the way that Gritty does. I mean, like,
No.
I love Reveille from Texas A&M, but even mischievous Reveille 7, who was Reveille while I was there, was not this level.
No. And the other thing too is that a lot of these other mascots have been around for a very, very long time, and they have been corporated to death. Like they are, you can go and buy a Miami Hurricanes t-shirt wherever t-shirts are sold. You can go and go to Cielo Vista over here and go to Lids and buy any other team hat, or you can see logos from other teams, and it's all pretty. I don't know. It doesn't lend itself well to being like adopted by anti-capitalists when they are capitalist images in and of themselves. It's like, okay, I am going to say I'm an anti-capitalist and I'm going to put a New York Yankees logo on my anti-capitalist shirt. Like, you would be laughed out of the anti-capitalist meeting. Like the most corporate team in baseball. I don't know, man. Like, I just there's something about Philadelphia.
Because I was going to say the only other mascot that comes close to me in sort of the realm of chaos is the Philly Fanatic.
Right, but again, Philadelphia. And the Fanatic is great. Just a fantastic baseball mascot. And unparalleled. Like, you've got the hot dog presidents that run at the Washington Nationals Park. You got Mr. Met. You've got the monster at Fenway Park. You've got Dingo the dinosaur at the Colorado Rockies Stadium. But none of the other ones drive an ATV around the field and troll the other team the way that the Philly Fanatic does.
We'll have to wait and see what their new hockey team, the Kraken, what they come up with.
Well, given that there's a certain team of lawyers talking about releasing the Kraken right now, maybe the Seattle mascot should keep its tentacles to itself for a little bit.
All right, Josh, do we have any other questions in the chat, or is John up next with his hand raised?
I think John is up next.
Well, I should have apologized to begin with, but I'm on my second flooding of my apartment today, and I think that's some type of record to have two in one daylight period. So my apologies for getting here late. But to Josh's point about the raucousness of Philadelphia, earlier in the conversation, did it get brought up about how at the Christmas parade in the 80s, they booed Santa Claus? Did that get brought up?
Of course it did.
I'm once again, this is ancient history, and I'm still just appalled. I mean, who wants you know, who wants to mess with Santa Claus? I mean, how? I just can't fathom that.
John, we did talk about that. We also talked about the batteries and the snowballs, and
Yep.
Buddy
Yep.
Ryan and the bounties he allegedly put on the price of Dallas Cowboy players' heads.
Okay.
We talked about all that. All that, of course, reflecting the city of brotherly love,
Yeah.
which I chuckle every time I think about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, there's another conversation to be had about chaotic nights in sports. You think of like Disco Demolition Night in Chicago, or I forget what team it was, but they offered 10-cent beer for the whole night. And you can imagine how that turned out. It just, you know, sports and chaos kind of go together, but there's a special brew in Philadelphia.
If I could leap back in, Josh, that was beer night at Cleveland Stadium.
Of course it was.
That was May 1974. My entire dormitory went up there, but I missed beer night because I was polishing boots for an ROTC inspection the next day. So I had to miss it. But you can find the details on that on YouTube. And about once every year or two, I go back and revisit the YouTube on that. And I'm still just, you know, we changed baseball on that. They no longer sell beer after the 7th inning.
Right.
That's a Cleveland legacy right there. That's a Cleveland legacy right there. I mean, it just, you had to listen to the guys in the study lounge the next day as they were breaking up the furniture and starting a fire in the fireplace to roast marshmallows. I did say it was the study lounge of Stouffer Hall, right? Yeah. So, you know, Cleveland can hang with the Philadelphia, at least when it comes to beer night. Yes. I don't think you guys have changed anything where you've modified alcohol consumption for an entire major league sport.
No, certainly not.
All right, so I want to go ahead because we are half hour past, and I really appreciate the intern.
My apologies.
Do we have time for one last question? If anybody has one last question. If not, thank y'all so much for joining us. We really appreciated this. If you want to see more kind of events like this, us talking about sports, politics, other things, please send me an email. I'm going to go ahead and end the recording. And if you want a copy of the